We must abolish sanctuary cities in Texas.
Texas State Representative Debbie Riddle actually slept inside the state capitol building for the entire weekend to make sure she would be first in line to file her bill for the upcoming session. Her mission, tackling illegal immigration.
We must do it. It's all about safety and security for the citizens.
Are we a state of laws or are we not?
I beg this committee to pass this bill so that there are not sanctuary cities for these people to live in. And you can stick your head in the sand and believe that they don't exist, but they do. And that there are safe places for these people to live, to pillage, to rob, to rape, to do anything they want to do.
If you really want to know why in Texas we don't get immigration legislation passed, it's because we have 36 Hispanic legislators in the Texas legislature.
There was a lot of concern at the beginning of the session. People were feeling that we were going to get rolled over. There was, of course, a very supermajority at the beginning of the session. Instead of having a bipartisan spirit, it was very clear that one party, the Republican Party, was in power. There was this concern that the fringes of the conservative group were going to monopolize the session and turn it into an anti-immigrant session.
Entonces es como dejar el todo por irse a otros lugares por el temor de que esas leyes se aplicaran aquí en Texas. Sí hubo mucho temor en la comunidad.
We were definitely shocked. We were all scared, of course, in the very beginning, but it immediately translated into action.
Our community, they were shocked. Some of them were afraid. Others were angry. But a lot of them also felt a lot of courage.
In Texas, there's a lot of leadership that goes against these anti-immigrant laws. Unlike Arizona and Georgia, the people didn't have that leadership, so people had no option but to flee and leave. It's really sad, but I'm proud to say that here in Texas, we're all united and we know what we're all here for when it comes to these bills. And we all work together. And undocumented people with U.S. residents and U.S. citizens, it just didn't matter. We knew what was right and we knew what was wrong.
These bills would be very destructive to what I think is a culture in Texas that folks cherish, and that was one of the first things that drew me to Texas, which was that Anglos and Latinos seemed to live together in harmony.
Thank you very much for coming to this historic press conference. TRUST was formed in 2007. It stands for Texas Residents United for a Stronger Texas. And the idea was that traditional Latino civil rights groups, though very effective in the past, were going to need a coalition in order to fend off some of the anti-immigrant legislation. And it was an historic coalition between the Texas Association of Business, MALDEF, LULAC, the ACLU of Texas, and a lot of faith-based organizations, under the idea that we'd work together during the session and afterwards to discuss immigrant proposals that were being introduced in the Texas legislature.
I want to urge my fellow legislators, as well as the leadership here in the state, I want to urge them to not allow this anti-immigrant measure to distract us from addressing the pressing issues that the next session of the legislature faces, that we confront. Issues such as balancing the state budget, redistricting, health and human services, education, employment, to just name a few.
It seems like we're reprising many of the same bills and seeing many of the same bills that have been declared either unconstitutional during the 2007 session by our own Texas Attorney General Greg Abbott, or that have recently been ruled unconstitutional by federal courts, both in Arizona and in other jurisdictions across the state. It is the same pieces of legislation that we're seeing filed here in Texas. And I, as a policymaker in the state, am sworn to defend the Constitution of the United States of America and will not be supporting unconstitutional legislation that has been filed.
There's a revolving door at the border and people can come back in. Jocelyn Johnson, whose husband was killed by an illegal, sure thinks Houston had a sanctuary city law in place, and that thinks that Houston is a sanctuary city. And I'm going to stand up with those men and women in the Houston Police Officers Union and the other law enforcement groups across the state that sure think Houston had a sanctuary city.
So what is SB 9? Texas Tribune reporter Julian Aguilar covers immigration issues extensively. He says it would prevent and ban so-called sanctuary cities statewide.
Some people say it's a double negative because it would prevent entities from enacting a policy that prohibits them from inquiring into the immigration status of a person lawfully detained or arrested.
So far, Aguilar says no one can identify a single sanctuary city in Texas, so this is more of a preventive measure.
What became known as a sanctuary city bill in Texas was essentially a bill that would not allow any local or county agencies from prohibiting their employees from applying federal immigration laws. And if they did forbid their employees to do so, then that agency would not receive any funds from the state. A very clear example of that, perhaps the best example, is a local law enforcement. And what this bill would have done was it wouldn't let local law enforcement executives establish priorities and establish their public safety strategies for their cities and their counties. Instead, it would give the officers that worked beneath them authority by state law to act on their suspicions, whether or not it was good for public safety or not.
Nos enfocamos en esas leyes porque nos iba a afectar a todos, no nada más a los inmigrantes, sino que afecta a todas las comunidades latinas más en especial, porque era como que nosotros no podíamos reportar un crimen por temor de que la policía tomara represalias contra nosotros o que la hiciera de migración.
We need to free up our peace officers for them to do their job, keeping our families and our neighborhoods safe. Immigration laws and their enforcement are the responsibility of the federal government. But we cannot compound their failure by preventing Texas peace officers from doing their jobs. We must empower those officers to apply their training, experience, and judgment to enforcing the laws by keeping municipalities from tying their hands.
We knew that it was going to be important for us to bring the voices, not only of the community who was directly impacted by this, but those who would also be very much impacted, like local law enforcement, to come and tell lawmakers, you do not realize that the bills that you are proposing are going to have unintended consequences that are going to be extremely, extremely harming to our state and to our public safety and to our economy.
I want to tell you what this is not. This is not a public safety debate. Because let's talk about that for a minute. We in law enforcement, with our very limited resources that we have, are already targeting the people that are committing violent crimes and property crimes throughout the state of Texas, regardless of their immigration status. We're after them. If they're legal, they're illegal, we don't care. We are targeting them aggressively, and we're going to come after them. But in our fight against these people that will do harm to us, to our families, to our communities, to our businesses, to the business environment, because you all know that there's a direct correlation between the public safety environment in the city and its ability to attract businesses and tourists and everything else. We need those other people that are members of this community, whether we like it or not, that are here illegally, that but for their immigration status, they're otherwise law-abiding citizens. We need their cooperation. And when you have law enforcement agents whose primary task is one thing and one thing only, and that's the safety of our community, become ICE agents, you really are going to create an environment with a lot of unintended consequences. It is counterproductive, counterintuitive, and although it may be politically sexy to sell that to a community that's frustrated because they can't find jobs, at the end of the day, what will happen is we will see crime starting going up. We will see impacts against all of us. And those that victimize an illegal immigrant today will victimize you or your family tomorrow. I mean, that's none of us live on an island. For every officer that's been murdered, like the Houston officer, by an illegal immigrant, I guarantee you there's tens and dozens that have been murdered by legal immigrants and naturally born citizens. So please, remove the emotion. I can tell you that the major city chiefs in this country are against this type of policy because it's counterproductive to us keeping your community safe. You have people that have spent their entire adult lives in the trenches in our community doing one thing, and that's keeping you and your family safe. So please hear our voices, because you're going to be hard pressed to find law enforcement professionals whose life work has been keeping people safe say that this is good public policy. It isn't.
The work that we were doing was for the good of every Texan. That it was about our values, it was about our economy, it was about public safety. And so we began using those terms often, and putting all of these misconceptions within that frame, and thereby shedding some light on what was really happening.
What we had to show was this wasn't a partisan issue. This issue of immigration cuts both ways for the political parties.
The progress should be made in Washington, D.C., not in Austin, Texas. We oppose legislation that will put undue and unenforceable mandates on the employers. Our members and the vast majorities, upwards of 90% of employers in Texas, work very, very hard to comply with the law. We think that Arizona-style legislation will be extremely detrimental to the state of Texas. The reputation it holds in the world and in the country will be badly damaged by this type of legislation.
There's already certain things that we have to do under mandated under federal law. We have to educate the children of the illegals or the illegals themselves. You know, the free reduced meal program is mandated by federal law. I mean, just those two things alone are very cumbersome for the states.
According to the Census Bureau, Texas is now home to approximately 15% of all illegal aliens in the U.S. People act as if they're not committing crimes, they're not harmful to Texas. They are harmful to Texas by their mere presence here, the cost they impose upon society.
One of the biggest misconceptions out there is that immigrants are a drain on our state and our country's resources. Immigrants contribute just like every other member of society contributes.
Incidentally, this is a myth about illegal immigrants collecting welfare. They cannot collect welfare unless they have a verifiable Social Security number. They cannot get a Lone Star card. I've heard this story for years. This is a bunch of bunk. The illegal immigrant cannot qualify. And the fact is that most of these illegal immigrants are doing jobs that Americans won't do. If you don't believe it, you walk through any construction site. You walk out, go find out who's washing the dishes at your favorite restaurant and who's bussing the tables, and find out how many of them are really American citizens. If you do this in Texas before you have federal legislation, if you do this without any way to make these workers legal, it's going to be detrimental to the economics here in Texas. It's going to hurt everybody.
And what we have seen is those states that have been anti-immigrant, Oklahoma, Arizona, Georgia, they've also suffered the most from it. Oklahoma had a huge economic downfall after the passage of 1804. Arizona, the CEOs of Arizona finally had to call an end to it because of the impact they had in their economy, the loss of tourism and the loss of business.
There has been a growing anti-immigrant sentiment in the last couple of years in the United States. Just like in the rest of United States history, immigrants are often scapegoated, particularly when there's an economic downturn.
It's about my constituents, like a grandmother in Huntsville who came to my office because nobody would listen. She lost her only daughter and grandson in 2009 at the hands of an illegal immigrant from Honduras who committed vehicular manslaughter.
Bad people come in all colors and in all different ways, and I think we're all aware of that. You know, I also believe that just by the mistakes of the few, you cannot possibly judge an entire crowd. And every time I come to this committee hearings and every time I hear, well, an illegal alien did this to such family, and I feel really sorry. You know, I'm also an undocumented immigrant. It really insults me for people to come up here and say those illegal aliens are, you know, deserve that stereotype because one or two are committing this sort of crime. The University Leadership Initiative, or ULI, and what we do, our main focus is to work on making college accessible for everyone. It's not just for undocumented students. Our arms are open for everyone, and anyone that wants to become involved in the issue, we embrace them. We have been here at a very young age, and we grew up, you know, getting in school buses and having friends of all backgrounds, and going to high school, graduating, going to graduation parties, and pursuing college, applying to college, just like every other young adult out there. We have done the exact same thing. We shop in the same places. We do everything the same, and we have fun the exact same way. And it's just sad to see that the perception that people have of us by simply looking at us and knowing that we are undocumented, for them to think less of us, when in reality we're not. We spend our days with them, shoulder to shoulder, and we're all the same at the end of the day.
Immigration and all that it encompasses is very personal for me because I was an undocumented immigrant. You may prefer to use the word illegal alien, but I'm not an alien. I'm not a problem that must be handled. I'm a human, a person standing before you now as a representative of the Texas House. I was born in Reynosa, Mexico, and brought to the United States as an infant child with the hope of a life my parents never knew or could dream I might have. My parents, along with my sister and I, came on a visitor's visa and overstayed our visas. We lived in undocumented status for 8 years until the Immigration Reform and Control Act of 1996 was passed under President Ronald Reagan, an icon for many of you. Under this act, we were able to become temporary residents, then legal permanent residents, and at the age 18, I went through the citizen naturalization process to become a United States citizen. I still remember my interview with the immigration officer. I was 18 years old, had attended Texas public schools from kindergarten through high school, graduating when I was 16 years old, and was a sophomore in college. Yet I was very nervous over the questions that would be asked during the citizenship examination. During the time we lived in undocumented status, I remember the constant fear my family lived with each day. The fear my parents experienced each day as their 2 little girls went to school. Not knowing if there would be an immigration raid that day. And they wouldn't be able to pick up their daughters from school, and not knowing who would take care of them if that were to occur. I know firsthand the impact of HB 12 will have on many families that are currently in the same legal status that my family once was. I know how this bill will push immigrants into the shadows. Mothers will be afraid to go to the grocery store to buy groceries for the family, as my mother once was. Because of my background and the many opportunities afforded to me, it is incumbent upon me to continue fighting to ensure that others can have the American dream and let them know that you can make it if you try and work hard enough, even if those elected to serve don't believe and protect that opportunity for you. Thank you, members.
We know that there is a host of individuals using our southern border to penetrate into the United States, and oftentimes these are individuals who would do harm, who are coming here for all the wrong reasons.
You know, rather than being considered a community who contributes enormously to society, to this state and to this country, we were being perceived and labeled as invaders, as people who were here to take advantage of the system, who were here to just get a free ride.
If I were a member of Al-Qaeda, or if I were a member of the Muslim Brotherhood, I wouldn't like this bill very much. Now, if I was a member of the drug cartels, I wouldn't like this bill very much either. So think of who the enemies of this bill are, the ardent enemies, the dangerous enemies, and ask yourselves, whose side are you on?
No government can stand up when policies are perpetrating hurt and harm to basic family institutions. It may look good on paper here in Austin, but how does it look in the homes of young girls and boys who see their mothers and fathers snatched away from them? How does it look from that perspective? Regardless of who your God happened to be, all religions seem to go against treating the stranger less than human. Any policy and any government that does that is on the road to destruction.
They're dividing families. We don't need to do this. I just came back from Washington 3 days. They need to let the federal government do this. Do not assume a responsibility that belongs to the federal government. So we're asking, please, senators, to do not pass SB 9. Do not do it, because you'll persecute the Latino churches. So I would ask you, please consider this, and remember, the next time opportunities come up to vote, we'll remember this.
As people of faith, we call attention to the moral dimensions of public policy on immigration. We certainly respect the rule of law. At the same time, our diverse faith traditions call us to welcome the stranger among us with both compassion and hope. In our holy writings, we are called to love the immigrants. We are called to immigrate them into our communities. In Leviticus, we are told the strangers and the sojourners who are with us shall be to you as the natives among you. In addition, you shall love them as yourself, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. In the Christian tradition, Matthew 25, Jesus says, I was a stranger, and you took me in.
I just want to end with, I've testified a number of times in front of y'all, and I've really never talked about my own road to becoming an ACLU lobbyist, which I think people sometimes wonder how you get to that road. And one of the answers is, yeah, that's right. the other than the money. One of the answers is, as a child, my father told my brother and I a story about our family. My great-grandmother, actually my great-great-grandmother, worked in a textile mill outside of Lubbock, and she was killed on the job in an industrial accident. The justice that the company gave my family was they hired my great-grandmother, her daughter, who was 14, to take that job. And why I'm telling you this story right now is because I've never forgotten that injustice, and it's part of how I ended up here. And I think that it's important that you realize this bill will be felt as an injustice by a large number of people in Texas. And, you know, the joke would be you're going to create a generation of lobbyists for the ACLU. But in reality, I do think people will remember this, and it's obviously very important to the state. And so I just encourage you to think of all those things as you vote on this bill.
Una de las cosas que me impresionó en este país cuando yo vine en el 88.
Did I understand him correctly that he has been here since 1988?
He came to this country in 1988. Yes, sir. That's correct.
Why aren't you speaking in English then?
Well,
23 years.
I speak English, but
You've been here for 23 years?
I have around 20 years. Well, okay. Sí, lo que pasa es que yo sé el idioma, pero prefiero, como es mi primera vez, prefiero hacerlo con un traductor.
It's insulting to us.
Thank you.
It is very insulting. And if he knows English, he needs to be speaking in English.
Nosotros nos quedamos callados ante las injusticias porque ha habido muchas violaciones de tanto la migración, de policía, de los políticos hacia nosotros, pero a veces nosotros tenemos ese miedo, ese temor, y yo les digo, no tengan miedo, porque realmente El miedo paraliza, pero el silencio mata. Y eso es algo que siempre les he recalcado, porque si nosotros permanecemos callados, se van a seguir violando nuestros derechos y vamos a estar bajo sus sombras y vamos a estar siempre a lo que ellos digan.
Sigo diciendo que la familia es el núcleo de esta sociedad y esperamos que estas leyes nunca vuelvan a pasar en Texas, porque Texas lo puede hacer mejor que Arizona. Y no nada más por nosotros, sino por nuestras familias, por nuestros niños que vienen, que son el futuro de este país. Entonces debemos de luchar, no importa que porque no tengo fluidez de mi idioma o de inglés, sino que defendamos nuestros derechos con el coraje y con nuestro corazón para dejarles un bien mejor para nuestros hijos.
I was top 10 in my class. I am the first person in my family to go to college. I have done nothing but to serve this country and this state in every possible way.
I had never testified in front of a committee at all, ever. At very first time, it was definitely scary. You know, it was just thinking that there's politicians in front of you, like, probably just, like, looking you up and down, thinking, who is this kid? Like, why should I really listen to him? But you realize that the more personal I made or people made their approach, the more they sympathize with us. The first time I was afraid of saying, you know, I'm undocumented and you should not pursue these laws because this is not just how you're going to affect my life, you're going to affect thousands of other lives. And you could really see it in their eyes, like when they were like, wow. You know, this kid just came up here and just said this, like, blatantly.
It seems to be so easy to cherry pick what kind of laws that you want to, abide by in this country. And it seems that what's up is down and what's down is up. I just have, I'm amazed that illegal aliens, what part of illegal do we not understand?
And I'm going to tell you, Maria, I got a real soft spot for kids. And so anything that puts kids at risk, because they can't help how they got here. And so, one of the things I see that is very, makes this a very difficult to consider is I can see where we can put some of these kids at risk, and I got to tell you, I got a real heartburn with that, a real heartburn with it. So,
some Hispanics and Latinos in our own community tend to believe that there is a difference between immigrants and us. The truth of the matter is that when non-Hispanics look at us, they think that we all just got here. They think that our grandfathers, either swam the river or broke the law coming over here. I'm an 8th generation Tejano. Yeah. And there are many others here that can follow a pedigree a lot further back than that. This is not the time for Texans to fear immigrants from Mexico or from any other part of the world. And we have to remember that. Texas is different. We expect different ideas from our politicians in Texas. We ought not to fear the future. These folks are introducing these bills because they're trying to protect their own political base. It's a matter of politics, and that's exactly how they're treating this. And shame on them for bringing this type of anti-American sentiment to the forefront.
Representative Eddie Lucio says Border Patrol stopped him as a teen in the Harlingen airport.
The fact that I had never been in trouble and just uncomfortable with a police officer kind of getting in my face, I didn't know how to respond, so I just automatically started to cry.
We speak from a perspective of recent experience, and I think that some of our Anglo counterparts, while they themselves pointed to the fact that we're all immigrants, whether they were Irish, whether they were German, whether they were Polish, the reality is that's kind of like past history. And the difference with us Latinos is that not only did some of us come from those immigrant roots, but today, as we speak, we still have that immigration ongoing, as we all know. We still have people coming over, some of whom are relatives to some of the people here in the legislature.
Right now, the Texas Senate is once again debating a controversial bill to ban so-called sanctuary cities in the state. The move would allow police to question the immigration status of people they detain.
Who do you think is going to be stopped? Who do you think will be treated differently? Is this the checkpoint that we want for our state? Is this the type of injustice? Members, the only thing that I can tell you is that I am heartbroken that today we are going to pass legislation that would treat my children differently. Because I have children with blue eyes and sandy hair and they look like their Belgian ancestors. And I have sons with the proud brown skin and eyes and hair and they look Mexican. They look Mexican American. And if we're passing legislation that treats brothers so very differently, how can that be right? We don't pass this checkpoint. We go backwards. And if those of you who would say that I'm pulling the race card, it's not about my race, it's about my ethnicity. And I wish I had the grace of Senator Lucio. I wish I could be as forgiving. And insult me all you can. Tear and jab at me. Because I can survive. But when you tear and jab at my children, I am not so forgiving. And when you rip apart families in my community and my constituents, I am not forgiving. I will speak out every day.
I can't think of a piece of legislation that we've considered this session, or really in recent history, that I believe will be judged to be so unfair and so inequitable as this piece of legislation. And it was so glaring to me when I was watching Senator Hinojosa and you have exchanges, because it became so apparent that you will never, ever be confronted with the provisions of this legislation. Neither will I, Anglo, members of this body, and the Anglos we represent. It just would be unheard of for someone in Houston on a traffic violation to ask me to prove that I'm a U.S. citizen. We have to slow down and think about what we're about to do if this legislation is approved. It's our moral duty to stand up against discrimination. We're fixing to impact every Hispanic citizen of the state of Texas, documented and undocumented. We spent most of our time on the undocumented. But what about the Mexican Americans? What about the Cuban Americans? Any Hispanic in the state of Texas, a citizen of the United States, is going to have to prove for the first time in our history under state law that they're a citizen of the United States. Let me close in opposition by putting a real face on this legislation. It will not affect me, it will not affect the Anglos, members of this body. But Senator Van Peet, will you stand up? Senator Rodriguez, Uristi, Hinojosa, would you please stand? Lucio, Zaffarini. Take a look at our colleagues, members. Mario Gallegos, retired firefighter, put his life on the line for all of us. Look at these members of the Senate. The first time one of them was pulled over the traffic for any probable cause, they're going to, for the first time in their life, a Vietnam War veteran, county official, I can go on and on, honorable U.S. citizens, Uristi, a Marine. This legislation will force them to prove that they are U.S. citizens and they're honorable members of this body. Proud U.S. citizens, Texans. Members, we can do better. This is a sad day. Please realize what you're doing and vote no on this legislation.
6 grueling months that spilled over into a special session.
The Senate adjourned yesterday. Today, so did the House. There was, of course, some legislation that did not survive. The so-called Sanctuary Cities bill, which would have allowed police to question the immigration status of people they detain. That failed.
We've sent the message that this is not acceptable. It's bad public policy. It's harmful to the state. And this is not what Texas is all about. So hopefully it will be the foundation for preventing future legislation like this, not only in this state, but in other states in the country as well.
People were so shocked and surprised to hear that the community was organized and was able to defeat so many anti-immigrant bills. For us, for the immigrant community, for the people that worked with us, our allies, the organizations, the business community, the faith community, law enforcement community, I think what this victory meant was this is a victory, but this is still just putting a fire out. I believe that other states are in very similar situations in this country. And so I think that moving forward, we want to continue pushing back on proposals and systems and policies that don't respect everybody as human beings, but we also want to be able to be proactive and to say, lawmakers, you represent us.
So what we have to do is keep the momentum. We know that just because we had a victory this session does not guarantee anything next time around. We have to remain vigilant and we have to continue explain to people why these proposals failed in the legislative session. It wasn't just because of the mobilization during the session, it was because they were bad policies that unified business, faith-based groups, students, educators, and civil rights organizations. It's so crucial that Latinos and people who support immigrant rights get involved electorally. We can't just get involved in the legislative session. We have to stay involved throughout the interim. We have to get involved in local politics. We have to get involved in the primaries.
Que no es nada más dividir, que estamos luchando por los inmigrantes, sino que estos son derechos humanos donde abarca todas las razas y todos los colores de todo el mundo. No es nada más decir vamos a luchar por los inmigrantes, sino que es en general los derechos humanos, de que nadie puede estar privado de los derechos humanos en ningún país